accept those as being correct?
Yep.
Yes? All right, so I will. Right, then we go to the affordable housing delivery with Housing Association. This is,
Are we a quorum?
that's an easy one on sport.
We need 8. I don't think we've got 8 have we, at the moment. But,
We're not voting.
No, we don't. If we haven't got it, then whatever we agree will be agreed by the board or discussed by
But
the board.
other meetings are happening online and they're fine. So
Right,
we haven't got any real approvals as such today. So
Okay.
we'll be fine.
rightio, as you said, there's no decisions here really, it's all for information. The item 5 is an interesting one. You may recall this got hijacked by the scrutiny committee. They didn't like it much. It's now back with a bit more meat on the bone, so that's down to Gareth and Rob. Gareth? Oh, Rob, we're taking
I
that.
think Chair Rob's going to introduce this one.
Okay.
Rob, shall I just say for the board's benefit, this does relate to a approved set of deliverables that were signed off by the board previously around affordable housing, including really upping our work with housing associations across the region more broadly. And Chair, we have Kevin Rogers, who's the chair of West Midlands Housing Association Partnership, who's also a member of the board.
Right.
Just for the minutes.
We also have an appearance to make, Gareth and I and Rob probably, next week at the scrutiny committee. Oh joy, to talk about this document and affordable housing in general. For Councillor Trickett and the chairman, so that should be interesting. Right, Rob, do you want to make the introduction then?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can see my slides on screen. So just to update, as Gareth said, this is part of a wider programme of work around affordable housing that common authorities involved in with partners, particularly, and on the screen we can see some of those partners within that diagram there in terms of working with local authorities, registered providers, Homes England and other investors and developers to bring more affordable housing into the region and really try and increase the supply and the quality to meet the local needs of the region. The deliverable that we're working to is very much focused on that whole broad programme, and the joint working with the registered providers in the region is very much a part of that programme. We've also recirculated, following some conversation at the last board meeting, and the paper that was approved by this board in January 2020, which was the regional definition of affordable housing to be deployed via our combined authority funds. A bit of a timeline on the current slide there, which takes us through from July 2019, when we originally sort of started this work, through to January 2020, when the definition was endorsed by this board, and then the current review of that, the deployment of that definition that's underway at the moment.
Rob, can I just, sorry, let's just pause there for a sec. Can we make sure that this is with the members of the scrutiny committee for next week? Because there seems to be some misunderstanding of what we know as affordable, what's been accepted by this board and indeed by the CA board in general. So I think they need to have that in advance so they can see exactly where we're coming from. And also, one other point, if I may, can we make the point that the new Help to Own scheme comes into the affordable bracket, because we need to embed that in all local planning authorities, because of the success we've seen in Wolverhampton, which we'll come to at the board on the next meeting. Okay. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, just, well, anyway, sorry. I agree with you, Chairman, but I think we need to explicitly produce a document that states what our definition, what the FWMCA definition is compared to the other definitions. So there is a direct comparative. So when reading through all these documents, it's very hard to actually tangibly grab what our definition is. So you do need to take that. But the further point is, my officers slightly disagree on that the Help to Buy does not meet certain affordability criteria in terms of national affordability criteria. So I just would like maybe the officers to check that, whether that Help to Buy does actually meet that.
Sorry, Rob, I've hijacked your presentation.
Sorry. Yeah. We can confirm that, but just to confirm that the Help to Own scheme that was produced in Wolverhampton, tried in Wolverhampton, meets the CA's definition and the NPPF definition as well.
And the NPF definition.
Yeah, but Robin, I will just check that and we'll write back to the board.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Rob.
That's fine, Chair, thank you. And just to hopefully cover some of those points that we've just touched on. So just going through the recognition of why this board and the region decided to work towards its own definition for our funds was very much that the national planning policy definition doesn't reflect local needs, and so the one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really help us deliver, particularly with the different affordability issues throughout the region in a wide and disparate region. We needed to address some of the affordability issues, particularly around, at the time, the huge increase in house prices in certain parts of the region, and also trying to look at how we increase accessibility to homes, so not just the affordability but the accessibility in the local market. In terms of the question around the difference or the variation between the regional definition and the planning policy definition, the current slide shows an element of that, and we can broaden that out and perhaps do a more detailed version of this slide for the committee, very much around what we were looking to do was both broaden the range of products that were available and that we could look to fund through the CA, and also the range in terms of what that target was trying to achieve. So we've included a selection of types of housing underneath the first orange block there, which includes all of the products within the national planning policy framework, but also looking to see where we can help with co-living, knowledge economy and key worker housing as well. And then the affordability measure was very much looking at a target of lower quartile household income. So what is actually affordable to people in that local area. Now, as we discussed at the time, Chair, and I'm sure you'll remember this, there's a lot of variance around what household income means in different parts of the region and how readily that information is available. So there's a bit of a time lag between when that information is published and when it is gathered, but that's very much been the emphasis that we've looked at, is to try and look at the affordability based on household income in the region. And that's different in certain ways in terms of how that's applied compared to the national definition, which is very much around market value, whether that's rental or sale. So that was just a kind of update on that affordability definition that we've applied to the Combined Authority funds. I'm very happy to come back to that in a further document or further detail. So then moving on to the work with housing associations, registered providers, which forms the content of the item 5 on the agenda. This is the latest update on progress working with registered providers in the region and other partners. And just on this first slide, really just to emphasise that this is part of that wider piece of work, working with Homes England around how we can maximise the investment in the region, working with RPs across the region on wider agenda items, including net zero development of skills, and then very much looking at different types of proposals to bring forward, and aligned to that, working closely with the Combined Authorities Homelessness Task Force as part of their work on designing out homelessness. So in terms of working with the housing associations on a pilot project joint proposal, this has been the subject of a number of reports, as you rightly said, Chair, throughout the recent months, and has been called in by overview and scrutiny in the past. So just to refresh really where we are on this, this is very much looking at a pilot project between the Combined Authority and housing association partners that are currently working in the region. This has been co-developed with those partners who, under the umbrella of the West Midlands Housing Association Partnership, came to the Combined Authority in Homes England originally with a proposal, and we've been working with them ever since to try and provide a means of taking that proposal forward. We are very much focused on genuine affordability and additional affordability, so this goes beyond what the housing associations are already looking to deliver in the region, and to try and add to that rather than compete against it. And it very much looks to implement the policy objectives approved by this board around brownfield first, the minimum percentage of affordable, but going way beyond that, and also the wider inclusive growth agenda. So what we've done with Kevin and colleagues in the Housing Association Partnership is worked up a number of different options throughout the last 12 months to look to deliver this. And within the umbrella of the overall partnership, which is over 25 housing associations in the region, 5 of those housing associations are looking to invest into a joint venture, which will then work with the combined authority to do exactly that. And the principles and the background to this development were discussed and endorsed at this board in January. So in terms of the next steps and where we are at the moment, as I mentioned, we've been making a lot of strides in recent months to develop the joint pilot approach. We're very much focused now on the principle of maximising affordable housing, so looking at up to 100% affordable housing on the schemes that we look to deliver. The delivery proposals that the partners are looking at very much are based on a kind of comparator with private sector approaches, so showing the different added value that this approach could bring forward. And as I said, we're very much looking at up to 100% affordable housing, looking at potentially key worker housing and making sure that these homes are near to public transport nodes and maintaining our high design standards and placemaking. We're looking at the moment at a package of 3 combined authority owned sites and the analysis and appraisals work is ongoing on that. And we've also commissioned external advisors to make sure that we've got the right appraisals to ensure that we're working in the right direction and getting the most out of our investment into this opportunity. So in terms of the paper, the recommendations, Chair, are around endorsing the positive progress that we've identified. Just to note that is part of a broad package. It's not the sole or the only approach that the combined authority is taking in this area, and very much forms that wider approach with housing associations and other partners. And also looking at the specific work that's taken on this joint approach to endorse and welcome that approach as we bring it forward and we work through these test cases to come to a business case in due course. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. I've got Councillor Simpkins with his hand up and also then Kevin Rogers. Stephen?
Yeah, we've established a housing forum in Wolverhampton. We also would like to work with the combined authority to deliver any joint ventures. I think it's got to be good for partners to move forward in this, but invite the combined authority to attend a forum meeting to discuss a pilot. But you know, about what the biggest thing that I'm missing in this paper is the collaboration between Almowers and council housing stock. Birmingham's got the biggest council housing stock, and that should be part of this conversation, not just housing associations. So if you could incorporate that. The other thing about affordability is, well, I don't know where other areas in the combined authority, we suffer from transient people who come when the rent's too high in the private sector, they start to move. So the affordability component should be that people can afford to stay rather than keep moving, chasing lower rent. Okay, I'll just ask Gareth to address that.
Yeah, just Councillor Simpkins makes an excellent point on engagement with arm's length body. We're working closely with WV Living at the moment in Wolverhampton, looking at a few schemes with the Deputy Chief Executive of the City Council and WV Living. And we've also reached out to Birmingham Municipal Housing Trust as well in terms of greater engagement across the piece. And also some non-constituent authorities, Chair, have also approached us about working closely with them in bringing forward affordable housing schemes from arm's length parts of council. So something we really want to look at. And just on Councillor Simpkins' final point, I think, Rob, could we bring that specifically into the piece of paper that was alluded to earlier by the councillor on making the interest between the NPPF definition and our affordable housing definition we use in the region, and that particular point that Councillor Simpkins has made about staying within the locality, not moving on. So I think that's a really good point. Thank you.
Okay, I've got 2 or 3 people in the room. I'll take those first, if I may.
Yeah, I just wanted to, you've touched on it in the presentation, but 3.3 within the report, it talks about the proposed pilot package would need to deliver and 100% affordable housing, which is fine. And then other WMCA policy priorities, including provision of key worker housing adjacent to a new hospital, provision of new homes adjacent to a metro station, and the other 2 I'm not particularly fussed about. But what I don't like, and what I'll say, is it's like we're talking about a site without identifying what the site is. And with, I mean, the report, the presentation kind of alluded to a building a business case around a site. But then the report talks about, further detailed analysis of, under 3.4, detailed analysis of, they're talking about any potential pilot sites. And what I don't like is if we've already decided on where it's going to be, we just need to come out and say it. I just don't like it when I read and report that and then, because for a start, Coventry's got no metro stations, for example. I very much doubt many places in the West Midlands have a new hospital being built, but we're talking about a site basically, aren't we? So we need to be open and honest and transparent about it.
Yeah. You make a good point. Because I've been out on the site, the one I would think for the hospital would be in the Cranford Street area, which we agreed probably 2-3 years ago now. But I think you make a good point, and I think we should identify that. With the metro, of course, you've also got a site out in West Bromwich, which is right by the metro, which is about 270 dwellings. But there's no harm, provided that actually in the bag, so to speak, and they're not out in the public domain for purchase, then that's the important thing. So if they are identified and we have got them under contract, I think it's important we put them in. If not, then of course the secrecy would be in the private section rather than in the public. But you make a good point. Andy?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just a few points. I think we could do a definition of key workers, a very strict definition of what we consider to be a key worker in written form, because in Solihull we're going to try and do things with key workers. But the people say, well, what's a key worker? Am I a key worker? Am I not a key worker? So we do need to, when we mention key workers in terms of housing support, we should say, who are they? And that needs to be explicitly defined. Net zero, I think recent events in Ukraine really does say we need to press on with net zero homes, because no way we should fuel a home with gas or fossil fuels. So we need to just make a clear statement that net zero homes is the way forward. In this report, I think what we could do, maybe for scrutiny as well, is a paragraph why we're doing this. It's all very much process. What is the desired outcome of all this? It's clearly, explicitly stated, so people who are not into the detail of housing can actually see this is the purpose, this is why we're doing it, as opposed to, providing, a strategy. And the third thing, I welcome the thing, we do need to think about the HRA account. And when you build a social house, in its early years, it creates a surplus of funding. As the house gets older, it creates a deficit. So as your housing stock ages, this viability decreases. So housing associations keep themselves viable by taking on more stock. It's the only way, it's their financial model is to create more stock. Now, people like Solihull Community Housing and local authorities have got an aging stock and the viability is going critical. So I think there needs to be some kind of relationship with the HRA stock to make sure we keep that stock viable by bringing on new houses, and maybe even if need be shedding the older houses if need be. That's the key thing, because potentially 40, I would talk about Birmingham, so I don't know much about Birmingham, but you predict in 30 years' time the viability of council houses will become very little. Like Coventry's shed their council houses, haven't they? They got rid of their housing stock because of the viability issue.
We did that in 1996.
Yeah.
We don't have any at all. But that's the model they work on, and that's really for them to actually replenish their stock. And I think you're right, that the stock they're buying now allows them to retrofit or demolish. In Warsaw, for instance, they demolished probably about 3,000 houses, and they're now in the rebuild stage of those houses. So that's the model.
I'm happy with that, but the council houses model, like the Almos, they do need to get front load their stock.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm Paul Kitson, and the Director of Place of Birmingham City Council. And thank you for allowing me to join you this morning. That's good to see you. And thank you for the papers. Just a couple of quick comments, if I may, Chairman. On the supply that meets local needs, it'd be interesting just to sort of understand how that works in practice and in reality. And the paper seems to indicate that we have setting some broad targets, but that we're flexible in the actual outcomes. So I'd be interested to think about how we feed back that practice and come back. I think broadly from a Birmingham perspective, we are interested in the key worker debate and the affordability point, thinking about pegging rents and so on to earnings and so on. So I think it's a great piece of work, but I think there's some details. I'd like to understand how it would work in practice, and that might be something Rob would pick up offline. So thank you. On the piece around affordable housing associations, again, very welcome that. I think it's the right thing to do. As we develop our strategy in Birmingham to think about supercharging the supply of affordable homes, and that's really a multi-strand approach, we will also be having conversations with multiple housing associations and thinking about these sorts of deals. My concern, if I could express it, would be that might be at times confusing for the sector. And so I seek through you, Chair, through this group and through the officers to work more collaboratively, I guess, in aligning those programmes so that housing association partners who sometimes report, and they have done elsewhere in the country, some sort of confusion between different public bodies. We're all speaking Times England, for example. So what I would implore is that the combined authority works probably in a more intensive way with districts in developing that relationship with housing associations, so that we're being kind to our housing association partners and asking them to do things 2 or 3 times. Thank you.
I'll call Kevin in to address those issues and others that he's picked up, no doubt, in the debate. I think with key workers, I think what we have to be sure of is that it's not too prescriptive, because during the pandemic, the key worker was only deemed to be an NHS worker. Well, that's not true. I mean, you all know my daughter's a funeral director in an embalmer, and she was pretty well under pressure and became very much a key worker during that pandemic. So I think we have to make sure we're not too prescriptive. But in actual fact, I think a wider definition of a key worker would certainly be acceptable. I'll come back to you in a minute, Ian. Kevin?
Thanks, Chair. Just on a couple of those points, I think the ultimate aim of the partnership is to make sure that as many of the affordable homes as we can. I mean, the Homes England Strategic Partnership bids that were announced last year gave the West Midlands RPs, or the West Midlands based RPs, over £900 million for 18,000 homes over the next 4 to 5 years. And what I want to do as chair of the partnership is ensure that as much of that 900 million gets spent in the West Midlands as is humanly possible. Now, to do that, we need land and opportunities to build the homes. So I think, you know, the whole concept of working with the combined authority and the work that we as Citizen are doing in Coventry and others are doing across the various areas of the West Midlands is just to make sure that those land opportunities turn into the right housing in the right places that are affordable to local people, and don't suffer from what's happened over the last 5 to 10 years of every major lands. It feels like every major housing scheme that's brought forward by developers either has inadequate affordable housing in terms of tenure types, being flats rather than homes, or the viability concerns of developers means that huge schemes are built with far less than 20 to 25% affordable housing. And we've had the figures through from the Department for Levelling Up over the last few months. You know, despite the pandemic, housing associations built 5,000 homes in the West Midlands in 2020-21. Now that was about 10% down on the year before the pandemic, but it's still an incredible achievement given what the various forms of lockdown and supply chain issues that were happening during that period. So I think for us, it's working together to make sure we build the right things in the right place. And the 3 sites that we've identified with the combined authority officers, I hope that we'll be able to demonstrate that we can build high quality, low carbon and affordable homes, and we'll see through the business case whether that can be achieved.
Okay, I'll take one in the room and I'll come back to Councillor Simpkins.
Chair.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Thank you, Chair. It's about working and liaising with the council housing stock. You know, we've all seen the pictures in the media about how poor standard it is. We need a proper strategy to rationalise council and arm's length stock, and that should come with the assistance from the combined authority, in my opinion. So as there we can, housing is about protecting people, and that's what it should be. the other point I want to make is that was made earlier about the homelessness. I'd like to define actually what the role of the combined authority is in that, because that's a statutory duty to each local authority. So I'm happy for us to work in partnership, but it should be the local authorities leading on that, not the combined authority, in my opinion.
I'll come back to you, Gareth, in a minute. I'll take one in the room and one over on my left. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. The elephant in the room, I think, is that whether we like it or not, and we don't usually use the term as slum clearance, but so many of our properties are low value and are probably 120 years old, and we need to put these parcels together to clear these areas. And what we are trying to do is enhance the quality of life in the West Midlands. And I think so many of these old properties, and that in every ward, every borough, every constituency in the area, we've all got them. And this concept of getting rid of dated old properties, very difficult to live in, no parking, very difficult even to put a dustbin on the front on occasions. And we've all seen them, we've all got them. And the reality is that part of this policy should be that on occasions we can put parcels together or an area together where we can clear some of these very old properties and start again and offer a better quality of life to our constituents.
Good point. Many of them are privately owned, unfortunately. Take the gentleman to my left.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. I mean, I have, as you know, spoken a couple of times regarding affordable housing definition, and I'm looking forward to this paper. I read through all of it. But I think the clear point it is that looking at some bar charts, I think next slides, that affordable is quite expensive, you know what I mean, and it's not affordable. If you look at Sandbox statistics, for example, and the income generate, you know, if somebody is working and, you know, the minimum wage is about 20k, 19k, looking at 80, 90,000 mortgage, probably 60,000 mortgage, and then you got to buy another, spend at least another deposit of 20,000, 30,000 before you can buy a minimum requirement house, which is about, you know, terrace houses, as you gentlemen were mentioning, the old houses and all that. You're looking about 150,000 these days, and even they can't afford those housing. So we need to understand. I mean, there's no. Well, what I was looking for last time I raised the question is, what exactly is affordable housing? The price range when you're building a new housing. Yes, we said we can build 20% affordable housing within that stock, but we need to know the cost of it. The minimum cost that, you know, that if somebody wants to buy a new house, you want to, for example, you want to go onto the ladder of buying a house, first time buyers, graduates, whatever it is, working first time. Can they afford that house? How much extra help and assistance we need to give and provide, if we can, and how we can do that, if it's feasible or not within the guidelines. And that's the most important part. I know we are all saying, look, we're going to build 20% affordable housing and all that. Fine, I'm happy with that. I have an issue with that. But the problem is the cost of it. The final cost, if you look at new build cost, you're looking about 180, 190. Yeah, even if you're a new graduate, you are on 28,000 probably on your first job, and it's not, they can't afford it. So it's going to take them about 5 years, probably 10 years before they can get to the ladder.
Well, that's where the Help to Own scheme actually fits in. The Help to Own is directed specifically for people who can afford to pay the rent but can't afford the deposit. So therefore, the mortgage payment they're paying in a Help to Own property is equivalent to the rent they're paying in probably the private sector. And so that's where that fits in. We've only got one site at the moment. It's been oversubscribed in Wolverhampton, I'm glad to say. We've got another couple lined up, certainly one in Walsall I'm aware of. But it's certainly something that needs traction, and it needs publishing more than it is. And I think that's the issue.
Just one more point, Chair, if you don't mind, just going to quickly. Working with the housing associations and all that, I'm happy with that. No issues. Key workers, I think we need to, as a couple of people said, we need to define that, which are the key workers. Other thing is we need to work within all the councils, you know, their own stock as well. We need to build on those as well. Because waiting list, as you know, the rent is quite high in private sector, and you know the council own rented sector, you know, their own property portfolio is a lot cheaper to, you know, we rent within the council, including Sandwell as well. I don't know about Birmingham, the same rates probably. But I think we need to work with councils as well to build their own stock as well and increase that stock. And that's one part of I think we need to look at. The second thing, I think we mentioned brownfield site here, Rob mentioned earlier on. That's something we need to work quite a lot on. Greenfield sites are very limited in certain areas, especially, I don't know also about Sandwalk. We only got a few small spaces here and there. I know we have got a few, private sector people we work with, we give them planning and everything, private park and a few other places. But I think we need to, work a bit more on brownfield side, bring it into standards so we can build some more houses.
Yeah, as I said earlier, we disposed of our housing stock back in the early mid-80s because we were a very poor landlord. It's simple as that. We allowed people to live in substandard properties because we couldn't afford to repair them. And I think that hasn't changed, whoever the local authority is. Section 82 of the Housing Act, we used to be in court on a daily basis. It was costing £2.5 billion. But Andy?
Yeah, thank you. Just a few points. One is in Solihull, we got a target of 40% affordable housing, had it for a few years, and we deliver about 37%. So it's deliverable. The key thing about affordable housing, it's paid for by land value. So if you've got good land value, you can afford. But what you need to do is to have a long-term strategy, because when people buy land, they need to factor in that they need to provide 40% affordable housing. So therefore, the landlord, the landlords can reduce their land value, and the housing Homes England can come in. It's all about long-term strategy. So we need to be firm, saying this is what's going to be in 5-10 years' time. This is what it's going to be in, and this is what we want from the build quality, etc., etc. And developers will factor that in. In terms of what we have is shared ownership in Solihull, which is a bit like the scheme, a bit more flexible than the right to buy. Because basically, we use housing revenue account money to help people buy a house, and as they go up their salary ladder, they can then pay off and ladder off that thing. So that's good for the HRA because there's no maintenance. It's also good for the person because they can at their point choose to pay off that capital sum as the thing goes on. So it's a win-win for the for the HRA, because you make a capital gain in the HRA when you take money out of reserve. So it's a cost-free system. So that's the key is long-term strategy, because developers will then factor in all the social costs and we'll do it. If you do it last minute, the developer will say, well, I've paid for the land, it's not viable, I can't do this. There's a viability discussion. But if you give a long-term strategy saying, actually, this is what's going to be in 10 years' time, then the developer has to factor that in their land negotiations. Because, in Solihull, we got, the farmer pays £10,000 an acre, the value of £20,000 an acre for value of farmland. If it's development land, it goes up to £2 million an acre. So there's a lot of money there that you can access. If the developer pays £2 million per acre, he's going to whinge about viability. It's that sort of. So you do need a long-term strategy in this, Mike. That's over 5 years, saying this is what the rules are, and this is the way developers got to go.
Sorry, go on. I'll call Matt in a minute, and then Gareth to respond to some of these points. So, Matt, you're in Redditch. I just questioned as well. Did you get the email I asked to be sent to you about the Help to Own scheme?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And there's a big difference between Help to Own and Help to Buy. And I think I wasn't confused too. Sorry, Matt, you carry on. All right. Sorry. Gareth then.
Yes. Sorry, Chair. Just to come back on a few of the points. So firstly, we'll continue our minimum affordable housing supply approach, but I think the thing that we spoke about at the last board, which we will definitely put into action always going forward, is that the affordable housing mix on any scheme that the CA invests in is explicitly agreed with each local planning authority before we go to investment panel or investment board. So we've done that on the 2 schemes that went to investment panel this week that are due to go to the next investment board. We've got the explicit agreement in writing of the local planning authority, not just to the the percentage, but also to the actual mix and the extent to which it meets local needs. So we will definitely do that, and I think that answers part of Paul's question. Just on the councillor's question, and again, we've had this discussion at this board before on estate renewal.
Yeah.
Now, one of the challenges that I mentioned previously is that lots of the government funding historically has only claimed new housing outputs, not replacement housing outputs. So if you do estate renewal and you in effect deliver the same number of houses, that doesn't count as a new housing output. And we'll come on to that, Chair, in the next section, but one of the things we are looking at in terms of the new levelling up regeneration funding proposals from the combined authority is a specific proposal around estate renewal and estate regeneration to support wider placemaking. And to stop this, you can only count a new housing output. Just on the other point that was made, coordination with RPs. So one of the things that Rob and Kevin are looking at is setting up a new officer forum between the combined authority and the West Midlands Housing Association partnership, and other officers from local authorities would be really welcome to join that group to address Paul's point of having separate conversations. Chair, I think that's a really good idea. And so if everyone could think about then sort of nominated senior officer, that would be really helpful. Just on the key worker definition, Chair, we've had this raised before, and I think the view of the board had been that that's really a matter for local planning authorities to decide in terms of the precise definition for their individual local area. But I'm really happy if the board would like the combined authority to do some thinking of some principles at a regional level. I'm again very happy, Chair, if that's what the board would like us to do, we can do that. Just finally, to tie 2 points together. At the last board, the board endorsed a public land charter. One of the principles of that public land charter was that the minimum affordable policy compliant levels of affordable housing were factored in when the public sector disposed of their land. To address one of the arguments that the councillor from Solihull made, Chair, just about public land, to try and set a bit of an example to others in terms of what we're trying to do, where we're disposing of land with that point. I would ask again the Chair's endorsement to the point that we made last time, which was I think we need to, I don't want to use the word campaign, but certainly discuss with the government the impact of the viability clause in the NPPF, because the impact it's having on the ground in the West Midlands is people are purchasing land assuming they're not going to comply with the policy requirements, and then they're arguing viability based on the NPPF clause. We obviously have managed to address that head-on, Chair, through the fact that as an investor, the combined authority can say, well, you hit our 20% standard or we don't invest. That is significantly harder for a local planning authority, Chair, that's dealing with a planning application where that viability argument can be used head-on. So as part of the next item, Chair, if you and the board agree, we'd be really happy as the combined authority to put some points together about the impact of that viability clause on the ground in the region, because I think it is having quite a telling impact at the moment on the market as we see it. And it's the reason why the combined authority is able to secure 20% minimum, and many local planning authorities are not able to do that on planning schemes, is because the argument that's coming forward is a viability one using the NPPF clause. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. I've got Matthew and then Steve in Wolverhampton. Matthew?
Yeah, thank you. Just back on the state renewal fund. So Redditch, we've still got quite a large housing stock. And I'm pretty sure we were in a pretty sorrow state as a landlord some years ago, which we've managed to turn around. So, but we've got a lot of older built houses and that have got really huge gardens. So if we were to renew that area, but maybe double the output of houses, would that be what triggered that state renewal fund then? Is that kind of what you're saying? You can't just replace, you've got to renew and increase, is it?
Yeah, that's true. If you're replacing one for one, there's no output. But if you are demolishing and building a greater number, then you get the differential as new output. Gary?
Okay.
But just on Matthew's point, the argument I'm trying to make to the government, though, is there are wider outcomes and wider benefits that should be counted beyond just the housing output. So doing that activity doesn't just deliver new houses, but it also delivers
New
jobs, wider social outcomes, wider community outcomes. I think one of the points that has been raised with me by a number of members of the board, as well as looking at energy efficiency and the cost of energy bills, and that is obviously a significant benefit of doing estate renewal as well. So that's the argument we're trying to make back into central government, is that it's not just the housing outputs that are the benefit of these sorts of devolved housing and land funds, it's the wider benefits that come forward, and obviously the council tax, the business rates that come forward as well. Thanks, Chair.
Steve, Wolverhampton.
Yeah, it's just exactly the same point. I think that if we rationalised our stock, you'd probably have more land. The other thing is, if we use modern techniques and we captured that with any funding streams from the Combined Authority, we could use modular building that would give us more space and also another economy. The other thing I want to make, Chair, is shouldn't we be asking these powers as it devolved to us, as we can release that funding? And that's what we ought to be doing as a strategy. But you know, we need to really have a strategy for council housing stock. Some of the horrific media posts and media news items are absolutely horrendous, and this is my people living in these states. So we need to have a policy and a strategy moving forward.
Okay, it's noted. Okay then, I think we've covered that now. Moving on to the next item then, if we may. Oh, sorry, yeah.
And I don't mean to bring us back to it, but if we're noting the document, I understand we're not really making a decision on it, but with 3.3, I need to know if we're talking about one particular site or if we have a criteria that, because this criteria at the moment for a proposed pilot suggests maybe one site in the way it's worded in the report. And for me, that is a problem. So we either need to be honest and say we're talking about a particular pilot site, or we need to go, right, okay, we need to set a criteria that allows it to be anywhere in the West Midlands that meets a set of criteria. Does that make sense?
Chair, that is our mistake. We should have made it a set of criteria that meet sites, because we haven't judged at this point, which is why the reason the board today, Chair, does not have a decision to make on land or investment is because the work hasn't been done, as was alluded to earlier on by Kevin, on which sites it should be against which. And what we've got here is the broad criteria that were endorsed at the last board. We're not being asked today about the sites because we don't know what the sites are going to be. We know, as the chair said, one of the sites is likely to be a site that's near a hospital. I think one of the problems is that that's almost formed the criteria in 3.3 rather than it is one of the sites that's being looked at as part of the business case work.
So I suggest then that officers take it away, look at it, and bring back some kind of revised criteria that can go forward. I'm fine with that then.
Happy with that? Yep, that's good. Moving on then. Rob, you're doing that one? 6.
Excuse me, Chair. Yes, this is me again. So this is an update on the devolved funds that the Combined Authority has accessed for housing and land developments. So just to summarise, really, in terms of previous years deployed or secured funds that the Combined Authority deploys via the single commissioning framework, as the members of this board will know well, we've been very successful in securing both the original housing deal in 2018, which included the land fund and the 165 million housing infrastructure fund. And then in 2020, we secured further brownfield housing funds, both from the initial brownfield housing fund and then from the National Competitive Fund element of that programme. So all of those programmes, as I noted on the slide, come with housing output targets and requirements as part of those agreements with government, and we deliver against those and report against those to government on a regular basis. And we also are therefore paid in tranches based on that performance. So all of those funds have been secured and are being deployed through the single commissioning framework as it currently stands. In terms of the more recent announcements that have been made as part of the levelling up white paper and subsequent developments, members of the board will have seen, hopefully, in the announcements that we've managed to secure both a £28 million extension of the Bradford Housing Fund. So that's on exactly the same criteria as the previous funds agreed in 2020, and then a further 17.5 million, or just under 17.5 million, through direct negotiations with government as well. So in total, in 2022 thus far, we've secured over 45 million of new funding, and that then brings us to a total of 153 million Bradford Housing Fund monies to be deployed throughout the region and deployed by the SCF. This board receives quarterly updates on progress of schemes through each of those funds, and this just shows that we are both successfully deploying the fund we've secured, but also building on that, we are showing government our delivery record and building that reputation for delivery, which is to secure further funds. One other thing just to note on that for 2022, I think in the last week or two we've found we've been made aware of the securing a further section of funding through One Public Estate of around £140,000 extra funding for the region through One Public Estate. So we'll bring some more details of that that agreement in due course to this board. So just in terms of the further opportunities noted in the paper, as Gareth has mentioned, we are currently in discussions with government following the publication of the Levelling Up White Paper, which included commitments of 1.8 billion funding in total for across England to support new housing communities and infrastructure. We are in conversation and regular dialogue with government on a weekly basis in terms of developing a proposal for some of those funds for the region, and very much looking at a broader and more inclusive approaches as members around the table and on call I've mentioned today around the impact of viability, the potential for estate regeneration. So looking at a wider set of objectives that would prove the impact of this funding rather than it being purely about housing targets or PCRs or market failure. So really looking at what the missions and the objectives that are set out in Levelling Up around community safety, around skills development, about access to opportunity. How could the funding that we would like to secure for the region, how would it help to deliver all of those objectives alongside more housing and more infrastructure enabling for the region? So the report gives some more detail of those funds, Chair, and of that ongoing development. And the recommendations of the paper are to welcome and endorse the securing further funding, and also to note and endorse the further work in terms of business case to secure more funding from government.
Thanks, Rob. In those discussions, obviously, we will be raising the viability that we face in the West Midlands. You put a spade in the ground, you never know where you're going to dig up. Sometimes the head of the spade disappears, but there we are. That's what we live with, especially in the Black Country. Okay, we're comfortable with that then? We'll move on to item 7.
Chair, can I just...
Sorry, yeah?
Sorry, Chair, can I just raise a point which would be helpful just to ensure all board members are happy with? So at the previous board, we agreed sort of key things we should be pushing for in the future government funding round are around the point that we just made, estate renewal and estate regeneration, support for mixed use regeneration, so not just housing and not just employment, but proper mixed use development, particularly in town centres. Commercial land, so as members will be aware, most of our funding is housing focused. The predominance of the funding comes with housing outputs, and there's a need for us to have funding to deal with commercial land in particular at the moment. The point that the chair made on viability is sort of front and centre of our thinking, because at the moment, overall, our programmes have to hit an average intervention mark between £12,000 and £15,000 a unit. And some of our sites that we're now, some of the more difficult to deliver sites are £30,000 plus a unit. But the point is that they start to impact on the market of that area, and they're real totemic landmark sites within a town centre or within an area, and that's particularly notable in the Black Country. And the other point that, again, just trying to wrap things together, if that's okay, Chair, is we did say that we would push quite hard on modular construction and net zero as two landmark planks of our ask of government. Rob didn't say it, but I will say it, which is that this now means we are the most successful region in securing devolved housing and land funds from government. So the 28 million was the biggest allocation of any region. The 17.5 million is nearly 60% of the national pot that was available. Previously, the National Competitive Fund, the 24 million, was 60% of the national pot that was available, and we had the biggest housing deal of any region. So just in terms of this board's work and the housing and land portfolio, is just to give the board confidence that the government has confidence in our ability as a board to deliver and oversee this programme, which is why we're confidence, probably not the right word, why we're positive about the negotiations we're currently entering into with government around the points that the board previously made, Chair.
I'll call Ian Cully next and I'll come back to Andy. I think the fact of the matter is what government are seeing from here is that we are delivering the outputs that we promised we're going to do, and therefore the money is being spent in the way that we said we would do it. It's not very often that politicians actually do as they say they would, but you know, it seems to me that we are. But Ian Cully next, please.
Thank you, Chair. You see that Councillor Simpkins has had to leave, so I've got a couple of questions that if I could ask on his behalf, please. Gareth, I think you could read my mind. The last point that you'd made in relation to intervention rates, really. So, Chair, you've mentioned this as well, that the existing intervention rates associated with the current funding has proved to be quite prohibitive in bringing forward a number of schemes in Wolverhampton and the Black Country because of economic viability challenges that we face, and the Eye Infirmary and the Pipe Hall in Bilston are really good examples of that. I'd be interested in how the emerging discussions with government in terms of the new funds that have either been secured or we're looking to secure, how the intervention rate could flex in those discussions. So, for example, how social value and those wider regeneration benefits that Gareth mentioned, how those are reflected in kind of value for money and intervention rates going forward. So that's the first question. And then the second question, Gareth, you'd mentioned that the intervention rates have varied on sites across the combined authority, with up to say 30k per unit in some instances. I think it'd be really useful for the board to understand on a site by site basis what those intervention rates look like and how they have varied across the range of projects that the combined authority have been able to fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I'll ask Gareth to address that shortly. I mean, the Eye Infirmary, I remember that. It was eye-watering at an Eye Infirmary. I've never seen, certainly, a viability gap that one presented. But that was probably 2 or 3 years ago, and I don't suppose it's got any better. But that's something else we can visit in the future. Andy?
Yes, Chairman. So about the intervention for brownfield funding. The Black Country Office for the Black Country during our local plan examination said that Solihull needs to provide employment land and housing land for the Black Country. Yet there is probably more brownfield site that could be done. So I think there needs to be a philosophy, more funding provided for cleaning up those brownfield sites than what because you don't know, as you dig, you don't know what you're going to find. So when you dig, you do need to have some kind of insurance or some kind of, insurance pot to say if they find something bad in that land, we can cover that. That's one thing. The second point is in Solihull, we have brownfield sites in rural Solihull, but we can't build on them because they don't meet the accessibility criteria, i.e. it's a brownfield site, which probably could take 10, 20, 30 homes, but we can't build on it because there's no public transport link. So we do need to just think about how we're going to bring those sites into line, whether we provide electric transport, autonomous vehicles or something like that. Because, the government sort of policy on saying you're going to build with all these things is actually stopping us developing on brownfield site, where it's completely viable from the building point of view. It's just not viable. It's not viable because it's got no public transport link.
Well, It's a good point. But coming back to the brownfield sites in the Black Country, all of the brownfield sites that we have still doesn't accommodate the amount of housing we're being told we've got to build. If we decontaminated every brownfield site in the Black Country, there's still a shortfall, which is why I'm fighting hard against that, and Ian Cully knows that, purely and simply because 10% of the greenbelt being released is in Walsall. And I will stand my ground as far as I can to say I ain't going to have that. There are other sites which the Mayor commissioned a brownfield survey himself, which is being told by some leaders that it doesn't have legitimacy because it wasn't commissioned by the leaders. But as far as I'm concerned, anybody who brings forward a site that we didn't know about, that we can decontaminate and have as housing or commercial land, I don't care who commissioned it. I really don't. You know, the delegated authority of the Mayor is such that he can and has commissioned that report. And I've asked Gareth to make sure, and Pat to make sure that he's with officers of the Black Country and the leaders are told it's there. Because there are sites there that either A, have been identified by the Mayor's survey, which he hasn't done himself, we all that consultants have done that. But more importantly, a different aspect of densification, if you like, that's the word I learned. You can put more on this particular site. If you flip it from being employment land to commercial, I mean, Moxley Tip is an example. You know, we've been arguing with the owners of Moxley Tip since God's dog was alive. They wanted £17 million of support, which we said, yeah, now it went up to 27 million. But that, if it were to be a housing site, would produce far better outputs than a commercial site that, unfortunately, at this point in time, despite what they say, hasn't got an end user. So I think there's a lot to be said about that. But the brownfield sites are certainly identified within the Black Country. And I take your point on the viability by way of public transport. I could say they should have cars, but somebody might say, no, you can't do that. It is a fact that public transport pays a significant part of a planning application. But sometimes you're quite right, maybe it shouldn't. Maybe the developer should be given the task to provide the infrastructure by a Section 106 agreement. In many cases we do that, but I think the point you make is one that I hadn't considered in the past, but certainly I will be from now on. Gareth.
Thanks, Chair. I really must address Ian Cully's point because I've addressed it on a few points in this board and I'm going to try and address it again as simply as I can. The CA does not impose an intervention rate on schemes. If you look at slide 12, there is an amount of money that is given to the combined authority and there is an amount of housing that must be delivered. And if you just do the maths and divide 100 million by 8,000 units, Chair, for the land fund, it comes out at £12,500. If you do the simple maths of 84 million divided by 7,500, it comes out broadly in the same average intervention rate, 12 to 15,000. And if you do the maths of 24 million divided by 2,300 homes, it comes out roughly about 10,000 a unit. It is not a CA imposed intervention rate. In order for us to deliver the output targets that the government have set, we have to deliver those housing outputs. So the flexibility, Chair, that the board receives every quarter, you receive in your commercial section, how much money has gone in from the combined authority and the outputs. And again, if you look at that, it ranges from about £30,000, £35,000 a unit on some of the really difficult brownfield sites to £5,000 to £6,000 a unit on some of the less contaminated brownfield sites, Chair. So what we try and do across all those funds that you can see on the screen is we try and manage it so we can give government assurance that we are on track to hit those overall targets. And Chair, just to give you a really good example of that, at the moment on the £84 million brownfield housing fund, we are under, just based on current investment, the actual housing unit numbers, because we've invested above the intervention rate in the last few schemes. But the pipeline that we give to government is able to assure them that by the time we've spent £84 million, we will have achieved 7,500 homes. apologies, Chair, for repeating that again,
No.
but I just think it's such a critical point, because I often get people say the WMCA intervention rate. Please, it is not a WMCA intervention rate. It is the rate we need to achieve to hit these government targets, Chair. And only if we hit those targets will we get more money come through.
I think it is fair to say, as well, that one of the schemes we did in Digmouth, the intervention rate or support, whichever rate, was only £5,000 a unit, and that was 950 units. So it averages out. There is no set figure. I mean, we've got a scheme in Warsaw at the moment where the guy's looking for something like £60,000. I think it's going whistle, but it's not going to happen, but I think I'm not going to drop it on your toes here because you might not have the answer. But with the iron firmly, I think it was something like about £3 million. Was it not? Okay.
So just Chair, is everyone?
Right.
One of the things I'm in charge of in this building, but just on if people are sort of comfortable with that as the position that we've currently got based on the government funding, then Chair, the thing we're trying to get from the new government funding is to take this at a real programme level, so we can really flex it.
Thank you.
So what we're trying to get, Chair, with the new funding, is much more flexibility within the programme on hitting output targets. So we can really flex it depending on need. And we might have, for example, schemes, we've got a few of these coming forward in Birmingham at the moment, but they require a higher intervention rate because they're delivering such good requirements in terms of modular construction and net zero, that to meet that viability gap, you would have to put more grant subsidy in, Chair, to hit those really top quality standards. So that's where we're seeing at the moment. But hopefully that's clear. And again, if I refer the board back to the commercially confidential sections they get at each quarterly report, that lists very clearly the amount of money we've put in and the outputs that are delivered on every scheme under the SCF.
Okay. Ian Cully, you wish to come back?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I caught most of that with the kind of the noise in the background. So the explanation is really helpful. Thank you, Gareth. In terms of the eye infirmary, then we are working with Gareth's team to understand what opportunities there might be to bring that site forward, and the kind of seeking flexibility going forward on new funding streams. Again, that's welcome. So thank you for the explanation.
Thank you, Ian. Are we done with that? Is that a legacy light on, Andy?
Oh, it is. Sorry, yes, it is. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you. We are just about to do a call for brownfield sites in Coventry, and we've kind of talked around the pressure there is in terms of numbers that government require for house building and everything. But I do look forward to working with Combined Authority as to how we bring forward more viable sites with that. So we have to work out within that process how we work that with you, Gareth, and see what we can bring forward. But I look forward to that work.
I think it's commendable that we should look back and see what successes we've had on brownfield sites. Every time we build houses on a brownfield site, it means the blades of grass further down the road are kept. I certainly hope that will continue to be the case. Right.
So just to repeat my offer that, and on the back of that conversation, so at Investment Board, I offered anyone to personally contact me if they had brownfield sites in their area that they particularly wanted to talk to the Combined Authority about. I've spoken to a few members of Housing and Land Board in the last few weeks as well, but just to put that out again, please do contact myself or Rob directly, Chair, if there are brownfield opportunities, or you would like us to come and talk to members. We've been to a few cabinets, we've been to a few member briefings in local authorities, we've been to a few chief exec and leader briefings in local authorities as well over recent months. So again, if that would be, we did a meeting with all of Birmingham's cabinet about 4 months ago, Rob, something like that. So again, we'd be really happy, Chair, to do that, just to make sure that people always feel there's a real easy entry into the combined authority on this agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke briefly to Gareth on the scheme which is coming forward, hopefully in Walsall, where we all suffer from empty shops. There's a gentleman whose office is, I can see it from here, has bought a shopping centre in Walsall, which in the early 80s was sold for 65 million, but now he's bought it for a lot less than that. However, what he has come forward is a scheme with 240 dwellings above the shops, because you can build up to the second story now without planning permission. So you imagine what that does. You've got no outlay by way of the planning application. You've got no interference from planners. I say that with some tongue in cheek, but it's 240 dwellings that we wouldn't have seen. And there's also an innovative scheme, again in Walsall, where I saw it, which I knew about anyway, but I saw it on the on your list of discussions, where they're looking to build residential properties on the top floor of a car park, which actually comes out at ground level because it's land level. But again, you know, those are things that we need to look at and say, yeah, that's different. So when you're looking around, it doesn't have to be a brownfield site that's ground level. It could be somewhere else where the combined authority can also assist. Right then, takes us on to the final real item of item 7. Rob, you want to canter through that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is an update report seeking endorsement of the high-level deliverables for the forthcoming financial year. The January meeting of this board agreed or reviewed the draft deliverables that were endorsed at that board, and this is just the final kind of endorsement before these deliverables are signed off at WMCA board this month. So under section 2.4 of the report, there's a setting out of each of these deliverables against the aim and objectives. It's part of the combined authority's corporate aims and objectives for the forthcoming year. There we go. And that sets out each of our kind of sections of work for the next 12 months. And as in current year and previous years, we will be reporting, as Gareth mentioned, quarterly reports against each of these aims and objectives back to this board to update on against each of these. So it's really a report just to endorse these high-level deliverables for the areas of work underneath this board for the next 12 months.
Thanks, Rob. Any questions or comments?
Sorry, Chair.
Andy?
Yeah, just on table 1, 4.2, can I just emphasise that is important for 2 reasons. One, the elephant in the room about housing is actually productivity. If we increase productivity in the region, we have higher wages, and therefore more people can afford the houses. That's a fundamental economic principle. But in the manufacturing, there's an opportunity here now to actually deal with that, but also help. I mean, we still build houses by laying bricks. It just seems to me a strange way of building houses in a modern age that we still go back to like a millennium ago. We built houses by laying bricks. You don't need to lay bricks. There are other methods, and we need to use this and use our manufacturing base, our engineering base, our whole region to actually decide how we can build houses efficiently, cheaper, with with more skill and better insulation. And so to do that, we do need to have the long-term planning, saying net zero is going to be a no-brainer, and then bring in and use the investment, economic investment, to create the startup businesses and the infrastructure in our manufacturing industry to build. I know one of my clients, Keystone, they work for another company, but they already make chimneys in the factory.
Yeah.
They already make, there's a manufacturer in the West Midlands who makes fire doors, not in the factory. So all the developer has to do is just plug it in. Everything's fully sealed, as opposed to buy a fire door to get the chippy to do all that. It's actually all done in one unit. So we ought to look at our manufacturing base and see how we can develop the skills, the training, the skills to actually build houses for cheaper as well. That's fundamentally the key point pillar of our strategy, I think.
Well, as a borough that has 2 or 3 brick manufacturing companies, I would obviously say I hope they will continue to use bricks. However, I used to manufacture those chimneys. I used to have a brick cutting business in one of my former lives, which I hated. But like the McDonald's principle, which is what you're talking about, these modules are now being manufactured. Kitchens come along and they plug them in. Bathrooms come along and they plug them in. Nothing new. But what they do tend to do is to use 20mm brick slips by cutting the face of the brick and then skirting the outside with those brick slips. When McDonald's started doing this probably about 20, 30 years ago, their argument was by the time they cast the floor in concrete, by using this advanced manufacturing as they were then, they could actually have the McDonald's open within 4 weeks, as opposed to probably would have been 6 or 8 months. And as with all franchises, they saw that as their way forward. There's a place up in Manchester, Liverpool area, where they've got a factory just full of McDonald's kitchens, McDonald's seating, so they just come along and bolt them all together. So, as I say, I've still seen the praises of the brick manufacturers like Ibstock and Wienerberger in Aldridge, because the clay is being dug out and keeping people employed, but there we are.
But they can do it differently. They could make it, they could advance, maybe they should get money from the CA to actually go into making a different way, making the bricks making a brick structure off-site and plugging it in. That's the future for that industry.
Accord Housing are doing that now. Yeah. That's a business which my authority, under my leadership, thankfully, we actually gave them a piece of land probably 10 years ago now, and they've got a huge factory now doing timber frame. The sad part is that the timber comes in from Sweden. I'd like to see it used from somewhere in the UK, but at the moment all the timber comes in from Sweden.
So, Gareth? Chair, it's something I've been thinking about for a while, which is whenever we get government ministers up, government civil servants up, we take them on a little tour of the region to look at all the different schemes the CA is invested in and see the outcomes of the products. We've never done that with members of Housing and Land Board, but actually, for colleagues to go and see the modular homes being built at Icknield Port Loop that we've obviously worked on together, to go to Caparo, which is in Walsall, and see that now coming out of the ground. That was one of the most remediated sites in the region. There is maybe just something we need to think about this year in terms of just going and looking, Chair, at some of the practical experience and the practical examples we now have across the region of AMC, net zero, brownfield remediation. We're seeing some of the affordable homes, so Help to Own, like you said, Chair, but we've also got some of the other affordable homes now coming forward in different parts of Cookley Works in Dudley, coming forward as well, which is quite interesting. Fountain Lane in Sandwell coming forward as well in terms of a new affordable housing product. So just put on any other business, but if members are interested in that, then myself and the team will look at how we can try and organise that over the year and make sure that we've got some really good case study opportunities for people to go and have a look around.
I think it's a great idea, Gareth. I have to say, I was born probably a couple of miles away from where I'm sitting now, and when I saw what Nathan Cornish had done at Icknield Port Loop, I couldn't believe it. I genuinely could not believe the amount of money that they were getting for those properties. If you'd have dropped a bomb there probably 2 years ago, you'd have had £100,000 of the improvements overnight. But what he's done there has been fantastic, and it's modular. It's demountable partitioning. Bathrooms came in and what I was absolutely blown away. But now he's working in Walsall with a small scheme at Urban Splash. But to go and see what's there, what was there before, and what's there now is really an eye opener. It really is. So can we team that up then?
Yeah,
sometime in the summer.
Very happy to organise that.
When we all can get together in a coach. Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just something what we're all discussing. What we found building modular homes is quite expensive and costly. So if we can manufacture them, build them, like I said, have the materials locally in source, have them here in our region, we can build a lot more faster and it'll be a lot cheaper. What we do find is importing and exporting materials is double the price, and we literally can't afford it. So if we can, and we're benefiting the economy as well, and we employ local jobs to local people, and we're sourcing locally. So we tick all the local boxes. So if that's something what we can do, even if it's building some sites on brownfield sites and have our own manufacturers, and we can share it within the combined authority, it's a no-brainer. But it's who's going to actually put their hand up and says, right, I want to build something and I'm going to do it. That's the question.
I think the thing is, that yes, you're quite right. At this point in time, advanced manufacturing or modular build can be more expensive. Not necessarily you need to have the critical mass to do it. However, the benefit is for the tenant or the owner of the property with the ongoing less costs of energy and everything else that goes with it. So yes, like everything else, until you get an economy of scale, then effectively it's like any new thing. We're talking about cars, or I was. Electric cars at the moment are blooming expensive, but the argument is that you save on the running cost. I think that's quite true, but you know, I think anything, and this is modular build is one. Timber frame was the only thing you could get going back probably 10 years. But now, I mean, we built some in Walsall where they literally came on the back of a lorry, they bolted them together, literally like containers. But you wouldn't know when you were in there. You wouldn't know at all. They skimmed them with bricks afterwards. And I think we built four semi-detached houses in 10 days. So, you know, it was very, very good. So you're quite right. But there is an end product result for the people who buy them.
So that's the kind of infrastructure we need. So that's the point I'm trying to make. We need something like that. We can run it quick and fast and ticks all our eco boxes as well.
So Chair, this is, I think Councillor is a really helpful intervention. So we've spoken before about how we can hypothecate a percentage of our funding to particularly support 100% AMC schemes. So we really try and drive the AMC industry. And so we'll bring back a paper on AMC to the next board to specifically look at that. The other point that we've said before, but we haven't really put it into practice, but I think with the councillor's intervention, we should seriously look at it, is what we do on CA land and what we do on public land within the region to help AMC manufacturers base themselves in here. In the same way that you were referring to earlier on, Chair, that you did in Walsall, you know, what can we do both with the land that the CA owns and with other public land in the region to create the infrastructure to make it happen? And we could combine that with the combined authorities infrastructure loan, so the commercial infrastructure loan that we can loan a manufacturer to build the factory and then obviously pay us back. And we could also combine that with the grant funding if they were doing it on a brownfield site and it needed remediation or infrastructure. So I think it's probably a specific project we need to look at in its own right, which is AMC infrastructure that the councillor raises, and maybe get a few sample projects so we can actually see some delivery before the end of the year.
What I'd like to see in that report is the location of those manufacturing bases as well.
Yeah.
I know there's one in Nottingham, and certainly one in Walsall, in Aldridge. There's one, I think, in Rugby, which is where the Port Luke ones came from, Urban Splash. So I think what we need to do is, because if we find there is a gap, and for instance, Birmingham, Coventry, or whatever, that there isn't somebody manufacturing, then we should encourage somebody to say, why don't you come over here? You know, this is because you've got a market that's, you know, already there. Yeah. So I think it cuts down on transport costs as well.
We'll come back. There's one on the bean at Dudley.
Is it?
Yeah.
Right. Well, you know, I didn't know that. So the paper will educate me as well then.
So we'll work, so Chair, we'll work with officers and our AMC task force. So just our AMC task force is chaired by Mark Farmer, who's the government advisor on modular construction. So we'll work with Mark and his team to come back to the board with a proposal specifically answering the councillor's question on how do we create the infrastructure to unlock AMC at scale in the region.
Right, that was good. All done?
Yep.
Lovely, thank you very much. I always say hour and a half's enough, otherwise people start dropping off or going home. Thanks very much for your time and your patience, and thank